I wasn't looking for love that day. I was just tired. Tired of routine. Tired of disappointments. Tired of believing that something good would still happen to me. I stopped at that small diner because it was raining. Nothing poetic about it. Just coffee, noise, and people passing by. And then he looked at me, not in a dramatic way. Not like in the movies. Just present. He smiled and asked if the chair was taken. I said no. And just like that, a conversation started. We talked about simple things. Work. Music. Life. He listened. That was what caught me. He didn't rush. He didn't interrupt. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. When I left, I didn't even know his last name. But I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. We started seeing each other casually. Coffee here. A walk there. He was always careful. Always calm. Always respectful. He said he liked privacy. That he was old-fashioned. That he preferred keeping things simple. I admired that. I didn't question the gaps. The unanswered calls. The weekends he was suddenly unavailable. I told myself I was being mature. Understanding. Different from who I used to be. And honestly, I wanted to believe him. Because with him, I laughed again. I felt beautiful again. I felt chosen. Or at least that's what I thought. I didn't know yet that some people don't disappear because they're busy. They disappear because they are hiding an entire life. But at that time, I didn't see the signs. I only saw what I wanted to see. And that diner. The voice you selected does not support this language. Please click the upper right corner to switch to another voice. Slowly became the beginning of the deepest lesson of my life. At first, nothing felt wrong. Or maybe I didn't want it to. We didn't rush into anything. No labels. No promises. He said he'd like to take things slow. That trust mattered more than speed. I agreed. Or at least I convinced myself I did. There were patterns I noticed but ignored. The way he never stayed too late. The way his phone was always face down. The way certain questions made him quiet. He never talked about his past in detail. He said it was complicated. I said I understood. He never posted pictures. He said he valued privacy. I admired that. He never invited me to his place. He said his space was sacred. I respected that. Looking back, I realized how gently he hid things. Nothing aggressive. Nothing obvious. Just enough truth to feel real. Sometimes he would disappear for hours, then days. And when he came back, he always had the right tone. Calm. Apologetic. Convincing. I had a lot going on, he'd say. You know how life is? And I nodded, because I wanted to be the woman who understood, not the woman who questioned too much. I told myself love wasn't supposed to feel anxious. So I ignored the anxiety. I told myself space was healthy. So I ignored the distance. I told myself he chose me, even when his actions felt divided. There were moments when my body knew before my mind did. A tight chest, a strange silence after we said goodbye, a feeling I couldn't name. But every time doubt knocked, hope answered louder. Because with him, I felt special. Not loudly, quietly, and quiet felt safe. I didn't know then that silence can also be a place where the truth hides. I wasn't falling in love with who he was. I was falling in love with the version of him he allowed me to see. And slowly, without realizing it, I was building a story on missing pieces. There wasn't a single moment that exposed him. It was a collection of small ones. A name he avoided. A question he answered too quickly. A story that didn't sound the same twice. I started noticing how careful he was with time, how every meeting had an invisible deadline, how he always needed to leave soon. I told myself not to overthink. That trust meant not interrogating love. But my body was already alert. One night he hugged me a little tighter, not out of affection, out of urgency. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and something in his face changed. He didn't answer. He turned the phone off, and suddenly he was distant. I asked if everything was okay. He smiled and said yes. Too fast. That night, I went home with a weight in my chest. Not fear. Recognition. I began replaying conversations in my head, the missing details, the half-truths dressed as honesty. I noticed how I only existed in certain hours of his day, never early mornings, never holidays, never Sundays. When I gently asked about it, he said I was reading too much into things. I'm private, he said. I don't like pressure. And once again, he made doubt sound like my flaw. But something had shifted. I stopped romanticizing his silence. I stopped excusing his absence. I started listening, not to his words, to my discomfort. There's a moment when intuition stops whispering and starts demanding attention. This was mine. I didn't have proof, only patterns, and patterns, when ignored, don't disappear. They wait. I still cared. I still hoped. But deep down, a quiet truth was forming. I wasn't sharing a life with him. I was fitting into the spaces he'd had available. I didn't go looking for the truth. It came to me quietly. A comment I wasn't supposed to see. A name I recognized but couldn't place. A feeling that refused to stay silent. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. No drama. No confrontation. I was scrolling, distracted, half present, and then I saw it. His name, his photo, and a woman standing next to him. They looked familiar, not intimate, but close. Too close to ignore. My heart didn't race. It slowed. I clicked once. Then again, there were pictures I had never seen, moments I was never part of, smiles that didn't include me, a birthday, a holiday, a life. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. That's social media lies. That context matters. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. He existed fully somewhere else. I remembered the Sundays, the holidays, the mornings he was never available. It all fit. Still, I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed to be sure. Not because I doubted myself, but because I knew what the truth would cost me. That night, when he called, his voice was soft. He asked about my day. He laughed, and I realized how easy it was for him to live into realities without mixing them. I listened quietly, because sometimes, before the truth is spoken, it needs to be felt completely. And that night, I felt it. The story I believed in was beginning to collapse. Not loudly, not suddenly, but in a way that couldn't be undone. I didn't go looking for the truth. It came to me quietly. A comment I wasn't supposed to see. A name I recognized but couldn't place. A feeling that refused to stay silent. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. No drama. No confrontation. I was scrolling, distracted, half present, and then I saw it. His name, his photo, and a woman standing next to him. They looked familiar. Not intimate, but close. Too close to ignore. My heart didn't race. It slowed. I clicked once. Then again, there were pictures I had never seen. Moments I was never part of. Smiles that didn't include me. A birthday. A holiday. A life. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. That's social media lies. That context matters. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. He existed fully somewhere else. I remembered the Sundays, the holidays, the mornings he was never available. It all fit. Still, I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed to be sure. Not because I doubted myself, but because I knew what the truth would cost me. That night, when he called, his voice was soft. He asked about my day. He laughed, and I realized how easy it was for him to live into realities without mixing them. I listened quietly, because sometimes, before the truth is spoken, it needs to be felt completely. And that night, I felt it. The story I believed in was beginning to collapse. Not loudly, not suddenly, but in a way that couldn't be undone. The truth didn't come all at once. It came when excuses ran out. A message I wasn't meant to hear. A call he couldn't ignore. We were together when his phone rang. This time he didn't silence it. He looked at the screen. and his face changed in a way no explanation could fix. He answered, not softly, not carefully. He said her name, and that was enough. I didn't need to ask who she was. I knew. When he hung up, the air felt heavy, not with tension, with reality. He sat there, quiet, like someone who had finally run out of lies. There's a family, he said. Finally. A wife. Children. A life I had never existed in. He said it wasn't what it looked like, that things were complicated, that they were separated in many ways. But families aren't many ways separated. They either are or they aren't. I felt my chest tighten, not from shock, from clarity. Everything made sense now. The mornings, the Sundays, the disappearing acts. I asked how long it had been this way. He said years, years. And in that moment, I understood the truth. He never said out loud, I wasn't a mistake. I wasn't an accident. I was a secret. He said he never meant to hurt me, that he was unhappy, that he felt trapped, but his unhappiness had a home, a table, a routine, and I was nowhere in it. I didn't cry right away. Sometimes the heart needs a moment to understand what the mind already knows. I stood up slowly, not in anger, in awareness, because when the truth finally arrives, it doesn't shout, it settles. I didn't scream. I didn't confront her. I didn't demand explanations. I went home, and that was when the pain arrived. Not all at once, in waves. I grieved a future that never existed. Moments I imagined. Versions of myself I was ready to become. I replayed every memory, looking for signs I missed. Moments where my intuition tried to save me. And the hardest part was realizing how much love I had given to someone who never gave me a whole truth. I felt ashamed, not because I loved, but because I believed. I asked myself how someone could share laughs with me while returning to a home. That wasn't empty. I wasn't angry at her. I didn't even know her. I was angry at the space I accepted instead of the life I deserved. There were days I couldn't eat, days I couldn't sleep, and nights where silence felt louder than any argument ever could. I missed him, and that confused me, because missing someone who is never fully mine felt like grieving something that never belonged to me. But grief, it doesn't ask for logic. It asks to be felt, so I let myself feel it, without rushing healing, without pretending strength, just honesty, because some losses don't come from endings, they come from awakenings. After the tears slowed, something uncomfortable remained. Not relief, not closure, clarity. I began to replay moments again, but this time without trying to protect him from the truth. I noticed how often I had accepted silence, as if it were temporary, as if waiting made me loyal, as if patience could turn uncertainty into love. I remembered the way my chest tightened whenever I asked simple questions. Questions that never had clear answers. I wasn't asking for perfection. I was asking for presence. And slowly, painfully, I understood that love should not feel like guessing. I had spent so much time trying to understand him that I stopped listening to myself. My intuition had whispered first. Then it begged. Then it went quiet. Not because it was wrong, but because I kept choosing hope over evidence. I saw how I minimized my needs just to keep the connection alive. How I smiled through discomfort. How I accepted half-truths. Because the alternative felt unbearable. But awareness changes everything. Once you see clearly, you can no longer romanticize confusion. I wasn't heartbroken because he left. I was heartbroken because I stayed in a story where I was never fully included. And for the first time, I asked myself a question that terrified me. What if the pain was not losing him, but losing myself while trying to hold on? Healing did not arrive gently. It arrived in quiet moments, when I was alone with my thoughts and had no distractions left. I stopped checking my phone, hoping for explanation. I stopped waiting for clarity from someone who thrived in ambiguity. and that withdrawal felt like withdrawal. There were days I missed him deeply, even while knowing he was never truly mine. That contradiction hurt the most, because letting go was not about forgetting. It was about accepting reality without rewriting it. I started grieving differently, not just the relationship, but the version of me who believed love meant endurance. I forgave myself for confusing attachment with depth, for calling emotional distance complexity. I realized I didn't need closure from him to close the door. Distance became my teacher. It showed me how much peace I had sacrificed for consistency that never came. I wasn't strong yet. I wasn't healed yet, but I was honest. I chose silence over explanations, space over false reassurance, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. And somewhere in that quiet, I felt something return to me. My sense of self, my boundaries, my voice. I wasn't moving on. I was waking up and awakening. I learned is often the most painful step before freedom begins. I didn't get closure from him. I gave it to myself because awakening taught me that some answers don't come from conversations. They come from courage. I understood something important. Not everything that hurts is a mistake. Some things hurt because they wake you up. I didn't lose him. I lost the illusion of someone I wanted him to be, and that changed everything. I learned that love should not feel like confusion. It should not feel like doubt. And it should never require you to accept half-truths just to keep someone close. I learned that being chosen in secret is not being chosen at all. I learned that intuition whispers long before pain screams. And most of all, I learned that walking away is sometimes the bravest form of self-love. To do, I don't ask myself why he lied. I ask myself why I stayed quiet for so long. And the answer isn't shame, it's growth. Because the woman who once waited for breadcrumbs no longer negotiates her worth. She chooses clarity. She chooses peace. She chooses herself. And if there's one lesson this story left me with, it's this: never fall in love with someone's potential while ignoring their reality. Because real love doesn't hide, doesn't divide, and doesn't ask you to disappear so it can exist.